Welcome to the TNF podcast. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Click on that bell for notifications. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music, give us a follow and give us a rating. That would be most excellent. All right. Upcoming shows we've got for you. On the 3rd of August at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we've got Javin Leonard from Drowning Man and Miles of Fire. On the 10th of August at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we've got Bobby Burns from Primer 55 and Soulfly. And on the 17th of August at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we've got Pete Collar from Sick of It All. So stay tuned. We got a lot of great shows coming up for you. I have a merchandising brand, Hell's Heart Merch Co. Go over to hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. Use the code WINNING, like Charlie Sheen winning, for 20% off your entire order. They're fine Bella Canvas Next Level Tri-Blend t-shirts. They feel amazing. If you like movies, if you like hardcore, we feature a few hardcore bands on there. And if you're a fan of film, we've got a bunch of film-inspired designs. Check them out. I think you'll really like them. My next guest today, really awesome, really unique guitarist. He's got a really unique flair that he puts to all of his projects. I've been a big fan of everything he's been doing. I was first introduced to his band, The Hope Conspiracy, back in 1999, and have been following their trajectory ever since. And they just put out a new release, which is incredible. I encourage everyone to check it out. But he's also played in the projects The Suicide File, Holy Roman Empire, and he's also got a group called Hesitation Wounds, which I just checked out for the first time. Incredible, incredible, love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Neeraj Kane. Thanks for being here, Neeraj.
Hey Jay, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Dude, I love that jam too that I played for the intro. That's that album, that whole album, like top to bottom, is incredible. That's probably my favorite HopeCon album.
Thanks. Really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a long time ago. That show, actually, that clip that you showed was one of the hottest shows I've ever played.
Where was that show?
It was at the Cake Shop in New York.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, like it was like 2010. It was like we had just put out I think our EP that came out after the like a couple years after That's Not Your Name, called True Nihilist.
Yeah.
It's a 3-song EP, and we had done some touring, and that was like the last. That was like our first show in the U.S. We had done like just come back. Actually, I think we had just flown from Greece to New York, and played New York City that night. And I remember it was like January probably. But the venue was like just sweating from the ceiling. It was an awesome show. It's great. But that was the last time that was the last tour that we had done until we played like last year.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the reason for the long dormancy?
Like three of us, like we had like, I think moving a couple people, like I was in New York. I think I was about to move to New York, and then our bass player, they took a job in Oakland, and then our drummer Jared was already in LA at the time for about a year, and so we were just everyone was doing other projects and pursuing other things. So we kind of were just like, I think real life kind of came into it, right? And we were a band that was kind of always, in my opinion, kind of on the periphery a little bit, and so we don't know, like I think we just kind of like took a step back. Everyone was kind of moving, getting their adulting happening, right? And actually we started writing like about a year after, because I had moved to LA then, and so three of us were in California, like me, our bass player, and the drummer, and so the three of us were writing a lot together for Death Knows Your Name too. So it's like, yeah, let's just continue writing. But as we started writing more and more. Everyone was kind of being pulled in other directions. Like some people were working, and then I was doing other bands. Jared was doing other bands. Kevin was on the East Coast doing, I think he was doing All Pigs at the time too. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, we were just like, I think that happened, and then we kept trying to write over the years, and then something would happen where I was like, yeah, it's not the right time. Let's revisit it. And we were in no rush. It's like we wanted to make sure if we were going to put something out that it was going to be quality.
And everything you guys have put out has been quality, like
Thanks.
100%. Yeah,
Appreciate it. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, like I said, HopeCon has been like a huge influence on me. You guys had just a really unique style. I almost equate it to. I feel like you guys are more rock than hardcore. Like I feel like, listening to the podcast that you did, I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, you said that you were really hugely influenced by a lot of British punk and oi, and that really comes across in your sound. And it's funny because I was thinking that before I listened to the show. And then when you said that, it totally confirmed that. I was like, oh yeah, I could totally see that now.
Yeah, I mean, when I got into punk and hardcore, it was like through skateboarding, right? And there was a lot of American punk bands that I loved, obviously, but I really gravitated to a lot of like the British stuff. It was just more gnarly. It was like very more fuck you, like just some of the fashion. Even though I wasn't a big mohawk leather jacket kind of punk, right? I really liked Exploited, a lot of the oi stuff was just kind of like the working class kind of element to it, where and there were catchy songs. There was just like
Yeah.
angst to it, but yet there were still songs, right? It wasn't just like, like just noise. It was like actually, oh, these are like catchy riffs and catchy songs, right? Good
Yeah.
songwriting, right? Sham 69, Foreskins, a lot of that's like, a lot of that stuff. It's like was really just really good songs.
Did you ever get into the Damned?
I did get into Damned, yeah, but not as much. But the Damned, I kind of went back to listen to more of the Damned stuff, like not years later, but probably like out of after I was like in college, and I was like, oh, this is great, But yeah, some of that early oi stuff, I was really into like kind of like listen to, but yeah, Exploited, Discharge, and the Discharge has been kind of like a theme throughout. I think HopeCon. It's just like that barreling kind of DB sometimes, but also
Oh
just
yeah.
like, not, and it's not complex, it's like I wasn't a metalhead before I was a hardcore kid or a punk kid, right?
Okay.
I listened to metal after I got into punk and hardcore.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I should say metal. I should say more so metal, because I mean I did listen to like Iron Maiden, Metallica, but I wasn't playing guitar at the time, so, and it wasn't like my identity per se. But when I got into skateboarding, it shifted where I was like, I don't really like metal. Like I want to listen to like DI and like DRI, like skate punk,
yeah.
like Descendants and early Bad Religion, Cro-Mags, Bad Brains. That was like kind of the crux of it, and with the British stuff too. But I also really like British, like the Britpop, like the early shoegaze stuff, and that was always something that I gravitated. The Cure Smiths, all that stuff was like, you know,
And I know you're a big Oasis fan, which I have you seen any of the recent shows, or you're getting ready to go see them?
I actually got tickets to the LA show, but I really wanted to see them in the UK, right? Because they are like one of my favorites, and they're just great songwriting, and seeing them in that environment would just be like unreal. Like even like today, I'm in Portland, like visiting friends, but I was like, if I could get a ticket this week to Wembley, I will fly out to see them, because it's just they're just the songs are just great. Yeah, so I really
Yeah.
identified with a lot of that the music from that early 90s era, and also like the late 70s, early 80s, like British punk stuff.
I really like Oasis. I do feel like a lot of their allure comes from Liam's almost punk rock attitude. Like he's kind of a dickhead, and he's kind of like, I think that's part of the charm of Oasis is just watching. I've watched supercuts of Liam on YouTube just saying the most like off the wall shit. Like like
I,
I
I
can't believe
mean,
he
very,
says that.
very much so. It's like, I mean, I think that they are unabashed about some of their opinions, and I relate to that, even though I'm not someone who's like openly about it. But like, I think there was an interview with, and not to turn this into like how much Oasis is rad, but like, I think it was Liam, no, it was Noel talking about he was being interviewed by one of the guys from Blink 182. This was years ago, like on
Oh
some show
God.
that Mark Hoppus was, I think, doing with music, and he's like, well, yeah, like the Beach Boys, and Noel gives him like this look. It's just like the Beach Boys. He's like, they're just popular because of the B, and they're just under the Beatles, and he's like, what do you? And then I think Mark Hoppus is like, what are you talking about? The amazing harmonies. He's like, and Noel's just like, that's fucking barbershop quartet music, and I was like, yes, that is amazing.
That's hilarious.
Right? And I'm like, I agree. I mean, like, I agree in the sense of like, I see the beat, and even the Beatles for me, it's like it wasn't something that I got in. I didn't grow up with it, right? The
Right.
Beatles and the Beach Boys are something I see their musical importance, but it was not an influence on me, right?
Sure.
Right? And so,
I could agree with you there. I'm a fan of the Beach Boys. I love Pet Sounds, but
yeah,
I could
yeah,
see how somebody wouldn't be that into them. You know, like
yeah.
it does kind of have a like a barbershop quartet quality to it.
Yeah,
I could see
and
that totally.
the look on his on Liam, I mean, Noah's face when he was talking about it, I was like, oh my God, you just nailed it, right? Barbershop quartet music.
Wow. Yeah, he does not give a shit, and I think that can be off-putting to some people, but I'm kind of like, I see what you're doing here. I see what you're doing here. You know, like when he
I mean,
was on Total Request Live with Carson Daly, and he was like, "How you feeling, Liam?" And he was like, "Good." Like,
yeah, yeah. It's just
who
like
the
the
fuck does that?
unabashed, yeah. And people are like, oh, they're so arrogant. I'm just like, obviously it's, I don't know, but I just think, their music, they're I think they have some, they can back up because their songs are just timeless and great.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Um,
he kind of plays it up a little bit, just a
yeah,
little bit.
totally. It's part of the act, I think, and I think
Yeah,
it's whatever. Yeah, but
yeah.
yeah, that was my. I'd love to. I'm going to go see him in LA at the Rose Bowl, so that's what I'm looking forward
Dude,
to.
I would love to experience that. And I think I talked to you about, trying to get rid of some tickets. Like
Uh,
I was prepared to go with some friends, and they're not able to go, and I'm like, oh man, I wasn't even planning on going, but then they're like, we got tickets, do you want to go? And I was like, hell yeah. And now they're not going, and so maybe, I don't know, maybe by the will of the universe, I'll be able to make it out there, but otherwise I'm
yeah,
gonna miss them live. But
yeah.
let's bring it back to the beginning a little bit. What was growing up for you like in your household? Was there music playing, and did you have any family members that played music? And how did that kind of seg into you playing hardcore? Like, did you play in a high school band? Did you play in like the actual band of the school? How Tell me about that a little bit.
No, I was basically, I mean, I grew up, my parents are, immigrants from India, and they came here in like the I think, late, early 70s.
What part of India,
Um,
if you don't mind me asking?
Mumbai.
Okay.
Yeah, like there's a town that's about 90 kilometers, probably east of that, where my mom was from, and my father's from Mumbai proper. Well, I mean, that's where they settled, but like my
Mhm.
ancestral village is about 6 hours south of that on the coast.
So,
Between Goa and Mumbai, there's like that whole coastline on the Arabian Sea. My family's ancestral village is about right smack dab in the middle between Mumbai and Goa.
okay. So they
Yeah,
moved here.
I moved here, and then growing up, it was basically my parents listened to a lot of Indian classical music and country music, because country music was something that they could understand the lyrics, and it was a lot more like storytelling, which a lot of Indian music is, and they really identified with that. So I grew up like we'd watch the country music awards like in the 80s, and so like I started listening to like we started listening to like Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, Loretta Lynn, the Mandrell sisters, like Alabama, and like really that kind of George. I think it was George Strait and like um, Chris Christopherson, like stuff like that. Um, so that's kind of what I was playing. So that's kind of what I learned, or not learned, but like that was kind of the music that was my first exposure to music. And then as I started getting older, I was just watching TV and then seeing bands kind of like, or seeing music that was interesting. So first, of course, it was I grew up a kid of the 80s. So like 1984, 85, 83 was Michael Jackson, right? Thriller. That was it. You're like, oh my God. And then breakdancing, right? And then that was a lot of like that early hip hop kind of, New York, like hip hop kind of the early beginnings of it. And then the same time, a lot of the new wave stuff that was coming up was amazing too. Like, like early Billy Idol, U2, early U2 is some of my
Yeah. Oh,
favorite
thank you.
stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know people like hate it, like to hate on U2. And yeah, the new stuff is not my cup of tea, but everything up to Joshua Tree and including Joshua Tree is incredible. Right.
Those first three albums they did, Boy, October, and War, could almost be like punk rock, you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, and I think they a lot of people don't give them credit for it, but those I don't think those guys really knew how to play their instruments until they started playing together, and they kind of formulated their own sound because they learned how to play together. And that's kind of how I learned how to play music was I'm not formally trained. I never like I took lessons. My parents put me in guitar lessons when I was like 10, and they didn't go anywhere because I learned like after being an educator, I really, learned how different people learn, right? And I have a learning style that's not very linear. So learning something that's like, okay, here's music theory, and then we're going to go learn first, we're going to learn this and that I just didn't. I was like, I want to learn how to play songs, and that wasn't happening. I was like, playing like, and at that time I was like 10 years old. I didn't want to learn how to play This Land Is Your Land and Green Sleeves or whatever the fuck else was going on. And so I didn't really pay attention, and I was like, I always wanted to go play outside. I was I was 10 years old. And so the instructor was like, hey, you guys are wasting your money. He doesn't really practice. And so I stopped, but I still had the acoustic guitar that they had bought laying around my house for years. And then I took clarinet for a while in middle school, and I learned how to play. And that again was I always had a desire to kind of play an instrument, but it was the blockage for me was learning the notate like music theory, right? And learning how to do music theory was just like it was a major blocker for me to really like instrument like playing an instrument, right? And I just couldn't do it. It wasn't the way I learned, right? Or the way that they were teaching was so traditional that I was like, I don't want to sit here and practice the same progression or whatever I'm learning over and over again. So clarinet didn't really stick. But I was able to play. I was able to sight read and do it, but I wasn't great at it, right? And it wasn't something that was like firing me up, until through skateboarding, I started got introduced to like all these other bands, like like this like punk rock basically, and I was like, wait, what is this, right? And it seemed like it was more of an expression of feelings and emotions and angst, and as opposed to I'm going to learn how to be a shredder and I'm going to play a Mixolydian scale and I can do XYZ. I was like, I don't care about that. Ingve
Right.
Malmsteen, fuck that dude. I don't, it's like, I mean,
Yeah. I feel
not
the
fuck that
same.
dude, whatever. I mean, he could be great, whatever, but it just wasn't for me, right? So,
Right.
and I've never like, and I think there's some people that I think that's beneficial for. And I would love to, I always strive to go back and I consider myself a lifelong learner. So I'd love to go back and maybe take a formal class on scales or training, and doing like that. But it just wasn't, it just wasn't for me at the time, right? And for me to learn how to play. And so when I got into like the punk rock and hardcore and even some metal, you know, but new wave too, like, early like Joy Division or New Order stuff. It's like, it's not like you don't have to be a shredder, it's like you have to have a, I guess a good ear, but for melody and song structure, and when you're listening to it, and that's kind of how I that's where my love for that style of music started kind of kicking in early, like, and it was kind of like growing up when I was in high school. It was a lot like the metalheads, the skaters, the new wave people. We all hung out together in like the art hallway in my high school, and we were all like the outcasts. So it was like, but we all listened to everyone's music. So I really got exposed to like a lot of different types of stuff. Like even though I was listening to Cro-Mags and the Bad Brains or the Descendants and like Slapshot, I'm still going over and checking out a Smiths record, or someone's listening to The Cure because they have a Cure shirt on, or someone's got Nitzareb or Front 242, and stuff like that. And growing up in Chicago, there was a lot of awesome local bands that I was getting into at the time. So it's like Naked Ray Gun, Peg Boy, Screeching Weasel. Some of these are still some of my favorite like childhood memories of getting into these. They kind of really set the path for me. And Ministry, which is another band that's from like Chicago, and it's like
Awesome.
or Al Jorgensen, so it's like
Yeah.
um and the whole Wax Tracks record, that's where I bought some of my first records were at Wax Tracks, so it's like there was, and Chicago was such an awesome scene for music at that time, and I think it's always been, but that's where it kind of spawned, where it's like, oh, maybe I could do this. But it wasn't until like a couple friends who were a little bit older were like, hey, we should do this band, we should do a band, and they saw a guitar at my house, and they're like, you play guitar, don't you? I'm like, I don't play guitar. I haven't fucking picked up a guitar in like since I was 10 years old. It was like I was probably 14 or 15 when we were talking about doing a band. And then the kind of rumblings were going on, and my parents were always supportive of me doing whatever. They were like, just like, don't get into trouble, whatever. But I picked up the guitar and started learning, like, because I didn't know how to play a chord. I couldn't remember how to play a chord, so I just started learning how to play the like bass line root notes for like hardcore bands like 7 Seconds, and like some early Black Flag stuff, and you know um like just kind of some of the stuff that I was listening to. And it kind of sent kind of started that bug, and then I kind of started learning from there.
I like what you said about how it's an expression and an emotion, because myself as well, I'm not really that into a lot of the technicality, a lot of the real kind of show offy guitarists and musicians. It's cool. I know there's
Yeah, yeah,
people that like that a lot. It just doesn't speak to me as much. I think that's also why a lot of the British punk and like the early hardcore and kind of the more stripped down stuff does attract me, is because it is more an expression of angst than prowess or skill or anything like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. And I think there's a place for all of it, right? Like, it's like you can listen to, like, I know a lot of people like, and that I played in bands with were fans of like In Flames, and that Swedish kind of like technical melodic metal, I guess. I never got into At the Gates or any of those bands, but I hear it, I'm like, oh, that's like pretty, that's like riffage, as I
Yeah,
call it, right? And it just wasn't something that I had like ever wanted to learn how to play. Does that make sense? I
sure.
mean, I
Yeah,
could play if I sat down and learned it, but it wasn't like something that was like driving me to write songs like that. Does that make
right.
sense?
And
Yeah.
and much myself as well, like I was always kind of attracted to that style because I felt like I could play it. Like I'm not I could probably learn it, probably not at this stage in my life, maybe when I
Mhm,
was much younger. Like I was a trumpet player and
mhm.
you know, I did that for several years, and I would, teach myself songs on trumpet and whatnot. But I did like punk rock and hardcore because I felt like it was something that I could play.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's like, a lot of people say, I think at that time, maybe, more in the mainstream. Now that hardcore is so big, it's a different story. But back then, it was just kind of like, oh, these a bunch of people who can't play their music, can't play their instruments. They're just like, jumping around on stage. And I was like, I guess if that's what you want to call it, go for it. But it was a thing that was important to me in my development, in my place that I wanted to fit in, right?
Mhm.
It spoke to me, like some of the early like New York hardcore bands, specifically, even like like Youth of Today and stuff like that. Those, Chromat, and those are the bands that got me into like looking into vegetarianism, got me into looking at, social justice in that regards, like that this isn't just music to make music. This is a music because we got something to say. There's issues that need to be addressed, that a lot of mainstream music is just about getting high or getting fucked up and whatever, right? And
Right.
um, like Bad Brains talking about like PMA, and just like, and just that, hey, shit's fucked up, or hey, we can do something positive here. That was really
Right.
attractive quality. Like 7 Seconds of the Crew record is a prime example of like that record, hands down, was like one of my all-time favorite records like that. And it was very positive yet angsty yet melodic, and you know um Minor Threat, it's just like there was something to say. It wasn't just like
Right.
music that was just for music's sake, right? So that was a really
Yeah.
big draw for me.
Yeah. 100%. I can totally relate to that, in that I never really connected with a lot of the drug music. Like I experienced this stint of straight edge in my life, but even after I stopped being straight edge, I would still listen to straight edge bands. Like
Yeah,
I didn't like a lot of the stuff that glorified drug usage. Like that to me was just like, you could sing about so many other things, and here you
yeah,
are, singing about, heroin or weed or
yeah.
whatever. Like, it's so superficial and just frivolous to me.
Yeah, at that time, it just didn't, and also it wasn't like my musical taste. As soon as I got into like skateboarding was my gateway. As soon as I got into skateboarding, and then I would look at Thrasher magazine, all the bands in there, I became very blinders to everything, right?
Hmm.
And I was at the era where, when I was growing up and getting into punk and hardcore, the grunge thing was starting. So like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains, and even some of the people that I play in bands with are young. Some of them who might be even a little bit younger. Their gateway was like like Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, that whole era. And for me, I was like, this is jock music, right? This is music I don't want to listen to. It's like a bunch of jocks in my high school listen to this shit, So I was like, fuck this, Nirvana included, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't later till later where I was like, wait a second, these bands are fucking awesome, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Right. And took me a long time to take those blinders off and be like, whoa, Soundgarden's got some amazing riffs, right?
Yeah.
And Alice in Chains, amazing music, right? Nirvana, I mean, simple genius in a way, right? Like that um just good song, just good songwriting, good riffs, and it was a movement that really changed. But at that time, I could care less because it was mainstream jock music to me. Like, it was not
Yeah.
subversive, it was not saying anything, it was not, for me, it was like I was listening to, Girl Biscuits, like, again, like early in New York hardcore stuff, right? A lot more stuff that was like that, like, that was like kind of saying something,
Sure. I'd
and it's more
argue,
aggressive.
yeah. Well, and I'd assert too that Nirvana's Bleach is pretty punk rock,
Yeah, I
and
mean, they are a punk rock band for sure. I just, because it was associated with who was consuming it at the time,
yes.
right? I
Yeah.
automatically was like, I don't want to be a part of that. And when you're young like that, you're so looking for your tribe, right? And
Right.
anything that deviates from that tribe, you're already like, no way, right? And I am self-admitted at that time was such a snob about it, right?
Right.
Because the people that I was like looking up to were also snobs, in the sense of like they were kind of gatekeeping. It's like, hey, is this person okay to kind of even listen to this tape that I'm gonna make with that's got like 7 seconds and JFA and Black Flag on it, that kind of thing. And I was like, oh my god, I
Yeah.
got the it's like, so there's a little bit of that, but I think and also it's a time where you're discovering your own music. It wasn't that it was hard to there was no internet, there was no Spotify. There was no, like, you're not looking at stuff that's just, you're not getting bombarded with content of any sort. A
A
friend of a
common
friend or a friend's brother or sister is the older brother or sister is the gateway to getting into some of the subversive music, right?
and a common theme on this show that I've had with many of the guests is that the accessibility is not as it's much more accessible than it used to be. Like you used to have to read something in a fanzine or have a friend or
Yeah.
somebody introduce you to something, and there's a certain quality to where you find something and then there's a select few people that like it, and when it starts to go outside the bounds of that little circle or that little collective or whatever, you get angry because it's almost like a possessiveness.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's like, oh, that's mine. Why does it have to be, and that's like foolish. But when you're young, that's your mentality because you want to, that's your part of your identity. And like, and if you want to be so different, like, and there was a lot of us who secretly really liked Nirvana, Nevermind, that record, right? But no one would ever say anything to anybody else because it wasn't cool, right?
Yeah.
Like for us, because they had gone now into this mainstream era where I remember like Green Day, for example, when Dookie came out, right? I was in my hometown at the gas station, and there was a Jeep that pulls up with a bunch of jocks blasting Green Day, Dookie, and I'm like, fuck, that's it. There it goes. It's gone. Done. I'm like, fuck, I'm out of this shit, right? And it's like that was my mentality, right? I was like, this is
Yeah.
what is happening, right? But
Yeah.
you know,
What can you do?
yeah,
And
exactly.
I would say that back to Nirvana, as I've gotten older, because I never really took to Nevermind that much. Like I thought it was cool and everything, but I think In Utero is a vastly superior album in almost every stretch of the way.
I mean, I'd love to have that discussion, but I've never really listened to In Utero, like sat down
Oh
and listened to.
wow.
Yeah, I just never like I never really got into like um I even when I went back, I mean, I know the songs on it, but I never like out of all the bands, I never really focused on Nirvana. The band that I really went
Yeah.
back and studied and really fell in love with it all over again was Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and their songs are just awesome, right? And I really
Yeah.
love I love all most of the records, and so it's like that was one of the bands from that era, and early Pearl Jam stuff I loved too. So it was like those are the band, but Nirvana was always a band I never like really like studied, even though I loved
Sure.
Dave Grohl's drumming and I thought Kurt Cobain was a great songwriter, you know.
Well, something that I didn't know until much later was that Steve Albini was the producer on Nirvana's In
Yeah,
Utero, and the whole story behind that is actually incredible because after the heavily produced Nevermind, they were like, we want something that's more stripped down. We want something that's going to sound a little more raw and organic. And they went to Steve and they were like, we want you to do our next album. Steve didn't charge them anything. He said, what would be a fair price? He said, or not that he didn't charge them anything. He just gave them the option. He said, how much do you think this is worth to you?
yeah,
And like that's unheard of for like, and especially a band of that caliber at the time, and like I love Steve's production. Neurosis is one of my favorite bands ever, and I
hmm
think he does a really good job of this real kind of earthy, like natural organic sound, but still like enough punch so that it like a heavier band can really kind of audibly resonate with its audience.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I like his production. I've always like kind of liked his production, and I was actually fortunate enough to meet him um, years ago, and very interesting guy and a purist, right? And yeah, I think you need those people to kind of level check the artists, if you will, like or the
Yeah.
artistry, and um, but yeah, no, so that was like one band, but when I started playing, y- I guess like yeah, that whole era of those type of bands that became kind of the zeitgeist of modern music at that time, the '90s, just kind of went over my head because I was so engrossed in hardcore, right?
Sure. Smashing
And that's
Pumpkins was one that was hard for me to kind of like admit that I was like super into as well, because they were one of those like commercial quote unquote bands, even though
yeah,
they almost defy anything that was coming out at the time because they were so different. They were
Yeah,
so different than like your Alice in Chains, your Nirvanas, your
yeah.
Soundgarden.
And
Like
I
they,
always like gravitated towards like the shoegaze sound. So those early, so now it's funny because all those bands have come back, like Ride and Slow Dive and all that stuff, which was I loved that kind of stuff, and they kind of mixed that, And now it's like you got these younger bands who are doing that. I mean, shoegaze is like huge now, which I was like, wait, what is happening, right? But yeah, that sound, I think Smash Pumpkins, I think, was able to kind of mix that in with kind of alt rock or whatever it is. I think that, so that was one of the bands I really kind of went back and then revisit, and they really kind of learned their catalog in a way.
yeah, yeah, incredible band. I love just about everything they put out.
Hmm.
What was your first hardcore show? What do you remember about going to a club and seeing a venue with, packed out with a bunch of crazy kids? Like, what was your first experience with that like?
My first hardcore show was Slapshot in Billingsgate.
Oh
Billingsgate
wow.
was a band from Chicago that was on Victory Records. They were like one of the first bands on Victory. One of the first like one or two bands. I think maybe a third or fourth band on Victory, I think, at the time. And then they signed to Nemesis. I think their full length was on Nemesis Records. But it was Slapshot's first, Slapshot's Sudden Death Overtime tour, I think. And they were playing this club called McGregor's, which was like a popular club in the suburbs of Chicago. And I actually drove by it the other day because my office, the when I have to go into work, is usually it's on the same street, and it's not there anymore. It hasn't been there for years, but I always look at that parking lot because I saw so many of my first shows there, and it was Slapshot, and I showed up and I was like, what is this? It was just like skinheads, metalheads, punks, and I think it was Slapshot, maybe Face Value. I don't know if you remember them. They're from
Tony
Cleveland.
Erba,
Yeah,
yeah.
Tony Erba. Yeah, Tony Erba.
Yep.
Um, and Billingsgate, and the show was just chaos. It was awesome. And then I remember going to school the next day and being like, no one here knows what I saw last night. Like, no, I'm so cool. Like, no one here knows anything. Like, I went to a fucking punk rock show, and it was sketchy and fucking crazy and dangerous. And, Choke is like, yelling at people, and it was like calling for a circle pit, and everyone's fucking, it was awesome. Yeah, it was about, I
Yeah.
mean, it was like life changing. I mean, like, that was my gateway into that world.
I felt the exact same way. And it was like me and a handful of friends, we went and caught. I'm a little bit later down the road, but
Hmm.
we caught Stretch Armstrong and Sky Came Falling and Nora, and like we were buying up all their shirts and stuff, and we're like, we're gonna be so cool, and like we're in such a like a small like microcosm of music here, like that, like you said, nobody knows about it,
Yeah.
so we felt
It
like
was.
super
Yeah,
rad.
because yeah, like the next day, I remember I show up. I have my Slapshot hoodie on that I bought at the show. Right, my friend shows up, shaved head, construction gloves with X's at school. We're like young kids, right? But it was just like people and like other people in high school were just like they had no idea, like what straight edge was, what like punk and hardcore was. It's like stage diving and slam dancing and moshing, whatever. It's just like it was awesome. Yeah, so that was my
Yeah.
first show.
How did that lead into you playing in bands? You mentioned you played in the band Extinction. Was that your first official band?
Now I was in a band called Cornerstone, and I think the first iteration of that band name was Intact, and it was a straight edge hardcore band. We had the graffiti font and X's, and wanted to be kind of more youth crew, I guess, at the time, because that's what was like kind of big, and we were into that stuff. And same guy, like a couple of the friends that we were all going to shows at the time, wanted to start a band. One of the guys was already playing drums in a band in Chicago that was playing some. They were opening a lot of the bigger shows in town, um, and they're like, yeah, we should do it. And we were all in the kind of suburbs. We were like the suburban kids, and there was like the Chicago kids, and there was a lot of like different parts of the scene, but came together and they're like, hey, we should play. And one of my best friends, he was actually at the time in high school, he was a band guy, like in bands, um, like not in bands, but like jazz band, and actually like a trained musician, right? And so he decided to pick up the guitar as well, and then we started learning from each other. So then I learned how to play a power chord, and then the rest, started writing our early songs. Then I actually switched to bass early, like as we started formulating the band out. At first, we had two guitar players and a bass player, and our first songs were, your first songs that a band would write that has never been in bands before, right? Um, and at the time, I was like, oh my God. And then we recorded our first demo, and I was like, this is so cool. This is awesome, yeah, we did that, and we started playing shows, and we actually played a couple of Earth Crisis's first shows in the Midwest when they first started, coming around. And the drummer actually booked one of their first shows in Chicago.
Wow, that's wild. How did that
Yes.
lead into Extinction?
That band like eventually broke up. The guitar player went to college, and on the East Coast, and you kind of got out of the whole hardcore thing. And then, but it was like for me, it was like it stuck. So now I'm like the sole guitar player in the sense of, okay, I want to do another band, right? And I want to do something now that's like and at that time it was like morphing from like the youth crew to early hardcore to now early 90s, mid 90s vegan straight edge mosh metal kind of stuff, right? Or metalcore kind of stuff. And even though I wasn't a metal guitar player, there were a lot of bands that were playing like heavier stuff that wasn't like, like your traditional like kind of youth crew style or like, traditional hardcore kind of style. And so again, people in the scene started doing another band, and then Extinction started, and we actually had some friends a friend in Indianapolis who was doing a zine at the time called Catalyst Records, and he also, I think, briefly played bass in Earth Crisis for like a tour or something early on back in the day, and he was based out of Indianapolis, and he offered to do our first record. So yeah, we started doing Extinction. It was like super straight edge, vegan, the whole thing, very political, and started playing a lot of shows in the Midwest. I actually played a lot of shows with Disembodied, and we'd always go out to Buffalo and play with like Despair and I'm trying to think of who else, Buried Alive towards when they were first starting. We were like kind of ending, but yeah, we became.
Snapcase.
We didn't really play with Snap. Yeah, we did play with Snapcase maybe once or twice, but it was very early on. So but we became really good friends with a lot of people from that upstate New York area, like Erie, Pennsylvania, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo.
And with that, because like I said, my first exposure to you was through Hope Conspiracy,
Mm-hmm.
which, I love the artwork to Cold Blue. Like, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really cool. Like, it almost reminds me of like, it could be the poster for some sort of political thriller, like some sort of John Frankenheimer movie or something like that. And I actually had the promo poster when I was in the military. I had it up on my wall, and
Uh-huh.
a bunch of my guys in charge, they said I had that. I had a Converge poster. They're like, "You're gonna take the shit off your walls," and I was like, "What the fuck, man?" And I was like, "All right, whatever," And then I think I put them back up after they left. I was like, "Ah, whatever, you." So, a great band. I absolutely love that album. I again revisited the other day in preparation for the show. Just to give it another perusal. And I've always been curious, what is Cold Blue? Like, what does that mean?
um, I think it was actually a reaction to kind of like the law enforcement apparatus, if you will, right? Um, and not just that law enforcement, I think just the powers that be, and I think that's just the common theme within Hope Conspiracy is like the corruption of power,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how it oppresses a lot of people who have the lack of that, right? And it's also it's constant, it's the abuse of power, and I think that's and that term, I think it might have been, you could interpret it as maybe the police or any other sort of like higher level governmental, anyone telling you what to do, kind of,
Sure, sure, yeah.
and I think
I,
that just that reigns kind of throughout most of the Hope Conspiracy songs and records is just that kind of, and we have a song on the new record called Struggle for Power, and I think that just encapsulates it all. You can talk about world events, and it's constantly the haves versus the have-nots, the powers that be, always, want to stay in power. So Cold Blue was, I think, a representation of how in certain states, whether it's some sort of like police apparatus that could be, you know.
Yeah. There's a lot of like conflict, there's a lot of turmoil, there's a lot going on in the world. And, it was really interesting to see, you guys come back and do a new album, because I was like, oh, this is really appropriate. This is really apt, because it's like, whatever way you lean or whatever your beliefs or your ideologies are, it's exactly like you said. There's haves and there's have-nots. There's powers that be and there's powers that do not be. And so it's
Yeah.
always been, like you said, a constant struggle between those opposing ends.
I mean, it's always the classic, the people in power want the people who aren't in power to fight each other so that to distract them from the real problem, right? The
Yes.
real people who are taking advantage of them, and so that's kind of, I think, and I think Kevin, the vocalist, he'd be more a person to talk to about more of the meanings of the songs. But I think overall the kind of theme of HopeCon is just, kind of like highlighting just like the power struggle, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yep,
and
that
the like the
authoritarian.
victimization, and I don't want to say, yeah, probably like who is the victim in this situation, right? The oppressed versus the oppressor, right?
Um, with the music, like, what were you guys kind of channeling at that time?
For which record?
Well, actually, to kind of rewind it a little bit, you guys did, the File 3, which was, that was actually, those were 7 inches, correct?
Yeah, the File of Three was like demos with two songs. I think one was an unrecord on yeah, two new songs and a cover.
And what was like kind of the influence as far as, well, we know yours, but like as far as like the rest of the band, what were they kind of into whenever you guys were like assembling those songs?
Well, for Cold Blue, that I kind of still hold that in that era, if you will. The File
Hmm.
of Three is kind of a continuation of Cold Blue, but so the guitar player from Cold Blue is Dan Zimmer, my friend Dan, who was
Dan
in
Zimmerman,
Harvest.
yeah.
Yeah, he was in Harvest, and so his writing style is very, very. You could tell, he did a lot of stuff for Harvest, and so it was that style. But I mean, when I started playing with them, they taught me a ton of, just like, oh, this is how we're playing, and this is, because my style is much more loose, and I kind of like to be more flowy. I don't, I wasn't really into all the like the tight Meshuggah kind of stuff, right? That wasn't my cup of tea. Like as far as just listening to, so we kind of had a blend for Hope Conspiracy where we took some of that stuff, where it's the really tight triplet like mosh stuff, or with like some more open kind of noisier hardcore stuff. So that kind of was the evolution of that sound, more mid
You,
tempo.
and with, the subsequent record, Endnote, you are not on that album, am I correct?
Yeah, I wasn't on that record. So what happened was, like, I wasn't in the band after File of Three came out. Actually, I think right when File of Three came out, I was in the band. But File of Three is actually our first 7 inch, like, and I think a demo song.
Yeah.
And don't quote me on this. I might be inaccurate. And then a couple of two new songs and a cover. But then Endnote came out. I was in the band and had started Suicide Files, as was the band I was doing at the time. And so they did that with another guitar player, and Jonas, or bass player. I think they were all kind of the primary song, and the drummer was the primary songwriters on that. But they still kept the theme going, because even though I wasn't on that record, I think that those songs are great.
They are, and it's almost like, it's kind of hard to believe that you weren't in the band, because they do kind of sound stylistically similar. It almost seems like they took the momentum of your style and kind of kept running with it.
Yeah, I think at that point Dan had left the band too. So it was actually at that point we had a different guitar player, Aaron, who him and I played. There was a little bit of overlap when he came in and I was still playing. And then I left the band for a while. But he was also, all of us were on the same page of where we wanted the sound to go, right? Even like, when I wasn't in the band, so they were naturally able to take that progression and move it forward.
Why did you leave the band?
That was a whole. I don't even know how to get into it. There was a lot of back and forth about um, dedication of who's going to be on, who wanted to tour, and it was just a lot of internal nonsense when you're young, and so I think I was like debating on moving back to Chicago, and I didn't, there was a lot of, yeah, but there wasn't anything like, it wasn't like any definitive like,
Not
oh, it's like,
bad
oh,
blood.
no, 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 it wasn't, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Obviously not if you came back, right?
No, no, because they've always been like that band. We're still all like family, and it wasn't like anything. There was no bad blood. It was just like,
Yeah.
I don't think I was the right at that time. I had a lot of stuff going on in my life where I don't think it was the right thing for me to kind of. I wasn't able to devote what they wanted,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Logistical stuff, life stuff. Yeah.
And then so they went with Aaron, who was the guitar, who then became the sole guitar player for a long time, who ended up like kind of going forward with it.
Um, yeah, I really like that album too. And you know, I think I caught HopeCon on tour with Boy Sets Fire, and like it is really just kind of, yeah, like almost like a continuation between the two albums, and then
Mhm.
you guys had like a few years dormancy, and then you came back with
Yeah.
Death Knows Your Name. Like I said, my favorite Hope Conspiracy album all day. I love it. I think that you guys definitely continued that sound, and you added. I want to say, like, and I mentioned this at the top of the show. It almost seems kind of more like rockish, almost.
Yeah, I think I don't know what we at that time. I could tell you that we were listening to a lot of Entombed that had come out of like when they had turned more into a rock and roll heavy, like death and roll band or whatever they wanted to call it, right? Less death
Yeah,
metal. But I was also, I think we were listening to a lot of like Queens of the Stone Age, just kind of not traditional in the hardcore, right? Like what
right.
hardcore bands do. And so it's like, how do you bring that into, I think, how do you make it different, right? That's always been my thing. Any band that I'm trying to do is I want to make it, I want to have the elements of the roots, what are my roots, but also bring in something that's going to really make it different and stand out. Um, and I was actually out in Boston visiting for, I actually was out there for like a work conference. I had gone back to teaching. I think I was out there for a work conference, and we were all just like, should we just jam and see what happens? And so we start playing again, and we're like, oh shit. And then we're like, let's just do a new record. And that's just how it came out. I think wrote and recorded all those songs in 16 days.
Whoa, that is.
Yeah, I think we wrote all those songs in 16 days and pre-pro it, all that stuff. Yeah, it was a really fast kind of thing.
That is so efficient. I've never been with a group of musicians that can do something so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we add a lot of finishing touches on in the recording process, but the skeletons of the songs were written really fast, like faster than we really had anticipated. And it is still one of my favorite releases that I've done, because it just came together, and then the artwork on it, the kind of the feeling that record, like just looking at it and gave you, and you're listening to it, it just all came together. It's like when lightning strikes, it just happens.
Yeah, yeah. No, it took me through a time in my life. I feel like I was kind of going through something. I think it was more probably just like a depressive episode or something. And I picked up that album, and a buddy of mine said, I said, "Hey, there's a new HopeCon album. Have you heard it yet?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, man, there's a cowbell in there." I'm like, "What?" Like, well, that's a stupid like reason not to like something. I was like, and then I listened to the song that has the cowbell, and it's fucking awesome. And
Hmm.
like I said, I was at a real kind of bad spot in my life at the time. I didn't really have any direction. I didn't really know what I was doing, where I was going. And I rocked the hell out of that album. And it just really kind of put me in better spirits at the time.
Oh, well, I'm glad it helped you, because those records are really important to me in the sense of like, that's kind of why, I think punk and hardcore is really impactful for me. It's like a lot of those records, like, a lot of records got me, other bands got me through like really tough times, or were some things that really helped me cope with some of the emotions that I really couldn't really understand. So it really means a lot when someone can say to me that, hey, your this song really helped me get me through this, or I appreciate you being able to write a song about this certain topic. That happened with Suicide File at one point, and it was really, really touching and moving. You know.
What was the story with that?
Suicide File had written a song about Matthew Shepard. I don't know if you remember Matthew Shepard. He was
Yeah,
obviously we didn't know him, but this was a very big story back in the early 2000s where he was, killed for being, openly gay man. I don't know if he was open or closet, but an open gay man. And, we wrote a song about it because it was fucked up and tragic, and what the fuck was happening in America at the time. And it's still kind of, you still see that hate towards, people who are, say, like different, whatever. But it's like just another human being, and we did and Dave, our singer, wrote a song about Matthew Shepard. And I had an email from somebody who was like, hey, this song was really, really important, that you guys were a band that was actually touching on LGBTQ issues, at that time. Right. And it really meant something to somebody, that we were actually making it known that, hey, we have compassion, there's compassion here for and sharing of that this isn't right.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
um
I mean, like that would feel really like you had done something that mattered, like to be able to receive a message like that from somebody for
yeah.
sure.
And with HopeCon, same thing. Like a lot of people are like, with Hope Conspiracy, it's like, it's with HopeCon, at least for me, it's a part of me that I'm lucky to be able to express with the guys that I'm in the band with, that is a very dark side, right? And those are some very dark emotions that I think a lot of people deal with. And how do you record that? Because I'm not like that. Everyone's like, whoa, this is really dark and heavy, angry music, right? And I was like, I'm not that person in real life, but that part that part is there, because everything I watch or read, it drives me insane, where I can't consume media anymore, because it's just like, ah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, also coming from an Eastern background, from a philosophical background, like, it is, what can you can, humanity is like, and I think it's famous, humanity is the devil, but sometimes you're like, yeah, you're like, what, this is, humans are kind of, can be awful at times, right?
Yeah. And like you said, I do definitely relate to you there in that, I come off as I don't know, I feel like I'm a pretty affable guy, but there is that enclave within my mind where it's like I'm listening to the fucking craziest shit. I'm watching the fucking like craziest movies and shit like
Yeah.
that. And it's like almost my way of processing things that
Hmm.
and then I'm like, I put on the whole, hey, how you doing? Like, what's up type thing,
Yeah.
and do you feel like writing for you with music is a form of catharsis that is kind of able to like, exercise whatever you've got going on in your life?
It has been, yeah, it definitely has been. And if I'm being completely frank, it's been, as now, I don't even know if I would like say it's like a different stage, but it's like, you grow older, and um I have, it's like you come to a point where you've been creative in a certain way. Now, how do you kind of morph that and still continue that forward? Where it's like, yeah, it was very cathartic for me, right? And when we played live, it was my therapy. I didn't have money to go to therapy when I was younger. My parents were definitely not sending me to a therapist. It was taboo within an Indian culture to look for like a psychiatrist or psychologist to address like mental health issues. It's always like, meditate, right? That's your answer to everything. Yeah, yeah. Acceptance, right? That's your answer to everything, right? But you don't process these things. So music was, and I grew up with a lot of, growing up in a culture where I was the minority. I experienced, racism, and that trauma I always kind of put off, but it was something that actually did happen, right? And how do you process that trauma? And yeah, writing like being heavy, hardcore, angry records is definitely cathartic, extremely cathartic. And playing live is still cathartic. You know, it's like
Yeah.
sometimes I just need it, right? And for a long time during COVID, I think it was the first time where I wasn't playing in a band for a while, and it's been hard. Yeah, it was hard for sure. And now it's like, we're playing shows and it's been great, but that, and how do you bring that same sort of like exorcism, if you will, on stage, right? Like for me,
Right.
playing shows used to be an exorcism of myself, right? To kind of just get all that shit out.
Sure. What were you doing in COVID? Were you actually still in the process of writing music, or did you pursue any other sort of creative endeavors?
So during COVID, I actually was taking some acting classes to kind of like see how that would be as far as like another way to express myself, right? And that was really interesting to kind of see. Yeah, I kind of put the guitar away for a while, and I have like a push pull with, also because I've had a lot of changes in the last like 5 years of my life that have been pretty crazy. So it's like sitting down with the guitar and just playing, right, with nothing, with nothing, no agenda, right, no song, no th- that's what I still strive for at times. But that I explored that. I explored illustrations again, illustrating again, and so kind of getting
What
into the other art forms. I still want to pursue a lot of those things. Just it's just like real life gets in, and it's like, oh, I gotta be in
with
film.
the acting, you were in Los Angeles. Did you study anywhere in particular, or was it just kind of private classes with one
Yeah,
instructor?
it was like a private class, but like one of my a friend of mine's good friend was a casting director, casting agent, and she was like, "Hey, if you're interested, right now it's kind of like you're like the perfect archetype that people are looking for within, you know, and you're not gonna fit like this. You're not gonna definitely get typecast because you got tattoos. You're Indian, yes, but you're not gonna necessarily be playing the stereotype, you know. So I was like, oh, this might be cool to kind of check out. But I did it, and but I never pursued like as like get an agent or do anything like that. I kind of wanted to just study the method and see like how, um, like when you're giving a performance, how you can actually emote that way, like you would within music, or when you're looking at a piece of artwork, right, or when you're creating a piece of like visual art. Um, how can you convey emotions that way? That's really important to me, because when I go to an art museum and I see a really powerful painting, it's always that there's like this emotional content, right? You can even look at the brush strokes, and if you're watching a movie, and you see a really powerful performance, you're like, whoa, this person, this actor really put that emotion into it. And that's the same thing with hardcore bands, regular band, whatever. You can hear when a band is genuine. You can see when an actor is genuine. You can see when art is genuine, right? Visual art or any other sort of creative endeavor. And that genuineness is what I'm still always like, I think that's my strive. That's what I strive for, is to look at whether it's in anything that I want to create.
What was your takeaway from the whole experience? And did you actually put up any material, like a play, or did you
No, no,
do any?
I didn't perform in anything. I did a couple of commercial like pieces that we had to do for the class. It was all online at the time because it was COVID, so they
Oh,
had done
right.
everything online. Yeah, so we were doing like reading via the camera, doing stuff like how do we do rehearsals for, not rehearsals, what was it called? Doing an audition for the camera,
Audition.
right? But yeah, doing virtual auditions. At that time, people were like, "Oh, how's this gonna go? How's this gonna go?" And now apparently, it's virtual auditions is pretty
The
popular.
norm.
Yeah, yeah. And so, how do you act for the camera? Like kind of stuff like that. Um, and it was much more methodology. There was one in LA. I forgot the name of it, which I was trying to enroll in right before I left. Um, and it was a friend of mine who I was actually playing music with for a little bit. She was as a voiceover actress and also was an actress, and I did some music for a pilot that she was working on, and she recommended this school in LA to try. And as I was like about to enroll, I took one of the first like free kind of introductory classes. Um, I ended up having to move back to the Midwest. So.
Was it Stella Adler?
Stella Adler. No, God, what was the name of it? It was a guy. It was a guy who was from Juilliard. Um, God, he had worked with like Rhythm. He had worked with a lot of like as an acting coach on set, right? Working with actors. I forgot, and he
Okay.
wasn't. He didn't prescribe to any of the traditional methods, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, but he had a very interesting take on God, what was his name still? I don't know. It was over right in Frogtown. That was where
Okay.
his studio was. Yeah. Um,
I wish.
if I remember it, I'll send it to you.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I studied at Stella Adler. That's why I was asking. It would have been
Okay.
crazy to go in there and see, well, I mean, I guess I couldn't have at the time because it was COVID, but like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I played guitar in the hooks. Holy shit, like that'd have been crazy. So, um, but you said it wasn't easy.
No, because I mean, it's just like playing music. It's you're for me, I always have a guitar in front of me, right? So I don't have to, that vulnerability is always my guitar is my shield, right? And
Hmm.
so I also like, I've written songs, like I've written like tons of songs where I could release as like a solo record, right? But that vulnerability of singing is what I was trying to get acting to help me kind of get over, right? Because that you don't have a shield in front of you, you don't have a drum set, you don't have a bass guitar, you don't have a guitar. It is you, and you are emoting. It's raw emotion. If it's like uh, if it's a dramatic scene, or something of that nature, it's you really bearing your soul. So that was it. It was hard. It's hard for me, right? And with music,
Yeah,
with hardcore, I got the guitar in front of me. Someone else can do the most vulnerable stuff. But even when I have the guitar, I can kind of have an out of body experience playing live and go crazy or whatever. But it's expected. I'm a guitar player. I'm playing in a hardcore punk band. I'm gonna fucking go crazy. That's different as opposed to, hey, I'm playing this role. I have to be emotive in a dramatic situation where it's like, hey, and I got nothing saving me.
sure,
If that
sure.
makes sense. Yeah,
All right. Well, are you ready for some trivia?
sure.
Let's do it. We're about to do some American Civil War trivia. And let me, okay. Yeah. All right. Here we go. All right. I know you're a big fan of Ken Burns's PBS documentary on the Civil War.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but yeah, I used to teach from it back in the day, but this was many years ago.
What do you feel like is so interesting about the American Civil War?
I mean, it's just if you look at it from an American history standpoint, I think it's just the again, you know, the the history of the United States is fraught with this sort of racism, like racist kind of crises, right? The country was built on slavery, and I think the Civil War was a really kind of addressing that the United States always had this like kind of tug of war where it wants to be something as a beacon, as a example to the world to be like, hey, look, we can live in a very like cool society with everybody here, equality, but it has this dark history.
Sure.
And I think the Civil War was when they were trying to, the country was trying to reconcile that. Where it's like, we can't do this anymore, right? Now,
Yeah.
this is a very non-nuanced take on it, right? Because the North was not doing it out of noble reasons yeah, they wanted to end
No.
slavery, but it wasn't because they believed that everyone was equal necessarily, right?
Right.
Um, but I think that's the United States has always kind of struggled, where it's like it just is right, it's there, right? But there's always something that specter of racism is, or inequality is. I'm better than you because of XYZ. You don't get that because you're XYZ. That has always been there. And I think it's not just the United States, but in most societies, whether it's you're
Yeah.
talking about the caste system in India, um, or slavery in other parts of the world, or sectarian violence, et cetera, et cetera. However, the United States is unique in the sense of, I think it might have been the last country to still have to actually abolish slavery legally. Like, to actually be like, hey, this is outlawed, done. I think the United States was might have
Right.
been the last one to do it. Yeah.
They definitely have different forms of it though in other nations, and I'd argue even there is a subtle level of exploitation that goes on even to this day, and it not necessarily like racially confined either. It's just more like a class type
Oh yeah, I think
scenario,
and I think that was also class in a sense of where, you look at the South. I think the Southern, um, they were able to hold their power because they had free labor, right? They
Right,
didn't want to.
right.
They didn't want to get rid of the free labor because then
Yeah,
they're not going to be able to have
they'll
those
have no
riches.
industry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
They're not going to be able to hold their economic status, right? Because they don't have free labor. Now what happens, right? But then with you see it, and once slaves get free, you get, um, the people who are doing most of the violence against the newly freed slaves are poor whites, but they're being pushed by these southern elites, right? The
Right.
southern elites aren't wearing the sheets necessarily. They're the ones who are like, hey, we'll make you the sheets, but you go do the dirty work, right?
Right, exactly. All right, so we've got American Civil War quiz for Neeraj Kane. They are in order of ascending difficulty.
All right.
So here we go. Number 1. Which Union general was fired by Lincoln after the Battle of Antietam for failing to pursue Lee's army? Was it A, George Meade, B, Ambrose Burnside, C, George McClellan, or D, Winfield Scott?
I'm going to go with B, and I'm probably wrong.
It was C, George McClellan, who Lincoln hated. Like, Lincoln was such at odds with this guy. Like, he could not stand him. And, like, did you know he ran against him in the 1864 election?
I did know that.
Yeah, kind of
Yeah, I did
funny.
know that.
Like,
I did
if
remember that.
fire me, bitch, I'll be your boss.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a pretty inept general. Didn't really, make
Do much.
any. Yeah, he kind of
Yeah,
sucked.
like for me, it was like when I looked at Civil War history, it was always the almost like the reconstruction, like what happened afterwards, right? The battles
Okay.
themselves is what was, I mean, the battles, what was happening, but any sort of military history wasn't like, I'm not really.
Uh-oh.
Well, you'll find out that military history
Oh,
is
we
not my.
continue.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Number 2. What was the primary purpose of the Union's Anaconda Plan? Was it A, to assassinate Confederate leaders, B, to destroy Confederate railroads, C, to blockade southern ports and split the Confederacy, or D, to liberate enslaved people in the border states?
I'm gonna say C.
You got it. And I didn't even know that one. Like, I was struggling with some of these.
Mhm.
Let's see. Number 3. What battle is considered the turning point of the Civil War in favor of the Union? Was it A, the Battle of Shiloh, B, the Battle of Antietam, C, the Battle of Vicksburg, or D, the Battle of Gettysburg?
I think it was Gettysburg.
It was Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Fantastic movie, too.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
Jeff Daniels as Colonel Joshua Chamberlain of the 20th Maine.
I used to show, what was the great, it was a really great Civil War movie. I mean, it was very
Glory?
dramatized. Yeah, Glory. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny thing is, my high school history teacher was one of the Civil War reenactors in the movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
he would always show that movie, and we'd be like, and he's like, "That's me over there." So the last scene when the army is like marching out to the beachhead to start, like, basically, when they're about to start the assault,
Yeah.
they're like, "Give him hell, 50." That's my history
54th?
teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it, like a blank yellow? He said he has a line.
No, he's not lying. He's in that crew.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
yeah, he doesn't have a line. He's like in that crew. He's
Okay.
like, I'm that crew. I'm the guy in the back right there. Yeah,
That's
they're
funny.
all like real Civil War reenactors, and they used to get together every summer and reenact some of these. So when that they were filming that movie, they actually called real Civil War reenactment like people. So and they were all had there's tons of them obviously, and they all lined up for like as Union soldiers for that scene when they're all walking out to the beachhead.
They did that on Gettysburg too, and I'll tell you what, it's a brilliant move from a production standpoint because
I'm
they
sure.
saved so much
I'm
money
sure.
on costuming, props, all this other stuff. Yeah, and they just
And
love doing it.
yeah, and that's the thing. It's like they love doing it. I remember my history teacher was like, "This was like a dream come true," because we were doing this without a movie, anyways, you know. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 All right. Number 4. Which Confederate general earned the nickname? This is an easy one. Stonewall at the First Battle of Bull Run. Was it A. Jeb Stuart, B. PGT Beauregard, C. Thomas Jackson, or D. James Longstreet?
see,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Stonewall Jackson. Number 5. What was the significance of the Battle of Vicksburg? Was it A? It was the first major Union defeat. B, it marked the end of cavalry warfare. C, it gave the Union control of the Mississippi River. Or D, it led to Lincoln's reelection.
say A.
That is a good
No,
guess, but it was C. It gave the
oh,
Union control of the Mississippi River. I
I
didn't
did
know
not
that
know
one
that.
either.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I'll be honest with you. I consulted Chat GPT to put this together.
Nice.
So yeah, I would
Uh,
have totally flubbed that one. Let's see. Number 6. Which Civil War battle featured Pickett's charge? Was it A, Fredericksburg?
wait, say
B,
it again.
which Civil War battle featured Pickett's charge? Was
Oh,
it
okay.
A, Fredericksburg? B, Gettysburg? C, Chickamauga? Or D, Second Bull Run?
I'm gonna say A.
That was B.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was at the end of Gettysburg when he said who was it? Who was that actor? The guy that was in Avatar, Stephen Lang, when he said what's Martin Sheen says to him, he said General Longstreet, assemble your army or assemble your company or whatever. And he's like, I have no company, like, because they all got killed in that
Oh,
charge. Yeah, yeah.
Stephen Lang is he the guy that plays is he the villain in that?
Yeah, he
In
was
Avatar,
the
in Avatar,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And he was who was he in Tombstone? He was uh I'm not remembering names right now. Ike Clanton.
That's fine. I'm really bad at any sort of movie trivia, so
Oh no.
you could say. I mean, I mean, yeah, I don't watch that much anymore, so
No.
yeah.
Let's see here. 7. All right, 7. Which Union general was known for implementing total war tactics? Was it A, Ulysses S. Grant, B, William T. Sherman, C, George Thomas, or D, John Pope?
B.
William Sherman, March to
Yep.
the Sea,
Hmm.
Burning Atlanta. Yes.
Sherman tank.
Yes. That's who
Yeah.
it was named after. Yeah, yeah. Number 8. Which document declared that slaves in rebelling states were free as of January 1st, 1863? Was it A, the Reconstruction Acts, B, the Emancipation Proclamation, C, the 14th Amendment, or D, the Freedmen Bureau Act?
Might be a trick question, I believe, but maybe I'm gonna say B.
Yeah, it's B.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
was your
Because
rationale? Why did you think it might be a
there
trick?
was there was some when the initial Emancipation Proclamation was issued. I think there had been certain legal issues that were being discussed with the Freedmen's Bureau during Reconstruction of like, hey, they're free, but there's the fugitive slave laws, and are those going to be enacted or XYZ? So I was like, also I haven't read or taught any of this stuff in many, many years.
I didn't know that actually. I would have, guessed.
So,
Yeah, I have no idea. Let's see here. 9. Which Confederate general accidentally died? Oh, they just. Which Confederate general accidentally died from friendly fire during the Battle of Chancellorsville? Was it A. Jubal Early, B. John Bell Hood, C. Thomas Stonewall Jackson, or D. Albert Sidney Johnston?
oh, I don't know this one. I'd say I'm just gonna take a guess. D.
Oh, it was Stonewall Jackson. That's
I
why I
didn't
was
know
like,
that
why
he
are they?
died, but I didn't know he died of friendly
Oh,
fire.
you didn't know that?
Uh-uh.
So the story is that it was nighttime and he was kind of like surveying uh the like the placement of the soldiers and whatnot, and like he's coming back through the Confederate line, and one of the sentries was like, hey, identify yourself, and I don't remember if he didn't hear him or whatever, but the sentry shot him and just killed him. And
I didn't
yeah,
know that. Yeah, yeah. I didn't
yeah,
know that. Yeah, yeah.
and he was like probably their most adept general. Let's see here. Number 10. This one. What was the name of the failed Union assault on July 30th, 1864 that involved detonating explosives beneath Confederate lines near Petersburg? Was it A, the burning of Atlanta, B, the Battle of the Crater, C, the assault on Fort Wagner, or D, the siege of Fort Donelson?
I'm gonna say you said how many choices? There's 4 choices, right? Can you
Yeah,
repeat the
burning of
choices again?
yeah. No. Yeah. The burning of Atlanta as A, B, the Battle of the Crater, C, the assault on Fort Wagner, or D, the siege of Fort Donelson?
I'll say D.
It was the Battle of the Crater, and I've never even heard of that. I
I've
couldn't
never
even
heard of
tell you.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
These are some deep cuts for sure.
yeah. Well, I did an easy to very hard one, but the easy ones were so easy. Like I was like who was the president during the Civil War? And it was like,
Well, I taught middle school
oh,
history and high school history, so it was very basic. And
yeah,
then
yeah,
I mean, my own research in it was mostly uh, post Civil War. Like, I mean,
sure.
Reconstruction, Civil War,
Reconstruction.
Reconstruction.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
actually, like military history, I know there's a lot of people that are very much into the specific battles, like who was where, who was positioned how, what the military tactics are, because that's studied quite extensively. I know that.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. I, uh, I don't, truthfully, I don't know a whole lot about Reconstruction era. They taught a little bit about it in high school, but it wasn't definitely as heavily emphasized as the actual like engagements militarily, like you said.
Hmm.
But it doesn't matter because you know what you get.
You get nothing.
No, I'm just kidding. Everybody that plays trivia on the show gets a shirt. Like I said, we got a fine line of shirts from Hell's Heart Merch Co. So anybody that plays, we get them. We get them a cool little shirt. So, but as far as with your teaching is concerned, you had mentioned you had been a teacher for middle school and high school.
Hmm.
Um, what was that like for you, and why did you depart that career path?
Um, it's funny because the teaching was secondary, if you will. Like, I mean, the content, like, oh yeah, I was a history teacher. I taught English. I taught both. And um, it became like I taught with very like tough populations, demographics that are really dealing with a lot of trauma, like individual trauma. So when you work, at least for me, when I was working with that population for as long as I was, that trauma gets kind of transferred. Like you have this thing called trauma transference, is what I think psychologists refer to it as. Because I wasn't just a teacher, and a lot of this, I wasn't teaching in traditional schools. I was always teaching in these project-based environments where I was helping, like, kind of be a mentor figure for kids who didn't really have anybody, right? And so I wasn't just a teacher, I was a counselor, I was a parental figure, I was an older brother or whatever, it's like whatever they needed, I had to be. So there was times where if something was happening in a child's home, me and a team from the school would at night have to go and deal with that, or you know someone's in the hospital, or there's an incident of domestic violence, or that's the kind of, it wasn't just, oh hey, I'm your high school teacher. It was always something more. And I got burned out in the sense of asking for, it was never the students. The students are always amazing, difficult at times, but it's never a child's fault for what they've gone through, you know usually when they're that young and that sort of exposed to that sort of trauma. But it's the apparatus of I think the educational apparatus just doesn't take care of their educators. So I was in a situation where I was getting burnt out and I needed to take like a sabbatical. It's like, hey, if I'm a valued teacher for your school, can you guys give me some time off? I'm feeling burnt, right? And I need, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't guarantee my job. They couldn't, they didn't want to do it. And I was like, okay. So I kind of had a nervous breakdown at one point, and I left.
And you left and
I
just
left and never went back. Never really went back to teaching. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
Did you-
it was, I just, your nerves get so fried that you're just like, I can't really, you know, how do you recover? Right? As my first kind of
Right.
foray after that, where it's like, I just needed the support and I couldn't get the support from anybody. My principal at the time was pretty supportive. My assistant principal was supportive. It was like the higher ups who were like,
Right.
the board and stuff like that, that just, and I don't know what they're, they are also trying to operate a school. And, if I was going to take 6 months off, they needed to fill that position perhaps. Right. But,
Right.
I don't know. I just, wish that there was more, it's like it might sound cliche that, oh, the education system doesn't take care of the teachers, but they don't, you know, um,
Yeah.
and I think educators are important. So that, mental health support and just giving them some room to breathe. And I just feel like I didn't have that anymore. And yeah, I got burned out. And so, I decided that, hey, if I need to, maybe I'll revisit it at some other point in my life. But, for the time being, I decided to step away at the time.
Well, from the way you made it sound, it's almost like you're playing a dual role as like a social worker as well.
Yeah, yeah. I was a social worker. I was a counselor. Stuff that I'm not trained for either, right? And that goes into the whole discussion about how education is funded in the United States, or how it's funded, all over the world. In fact, I don't think the United States is an anomaly that education doesn't get the same amount of funding as other things, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's just like how you look at it, and you know, if they had the right resources, then that would be me, that I could focus on just being a teacher as opposed to being a social worker, or um, a stable adult figure in a child's life.
Did you find it ultimately rewarding though?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no question. Yeah. When a student comes up to you and says, "Hey, man, you really changed my life," right? And I've had students who have really done amazing stuff, and I feel proud that they're able to do that. And they always, not one student has ever been like thankless, right? The administrations can be thankless, but never the students. The students always recognize when, hey, you really helped me get through, a part of my life where I was lost and I didn't know what I was going to do. And now I've broke this cycle of whether it's poverty or, violence or whatever it may be, um, where they've found their way to break that cycle, right? And so you always take that and you're always like, hey, I did something good, So I
Yeah.
never. It was definitely rewarding, and sometimes you do miss the, um, because you're working with other humans and you're hopefully making an impact on humanity in a positive way, right? That's, I think,
Sure.
within the hardcore and punk kind of ethos with music too. It's like the music might be negative, but you're like, for example, I always say this about like Hatebreed, right? It's the most motivational speaker band of all
Yes.
time, right?
Yes.
You listen to like Perseverance, and you're like, "What the hell? This is amazing!" Right? It's like it is
The
so,
album's called Perseverance.
yeah, yeah, and it's like that kind of thing where it's I think that's sort of ethos is part of like just at least in my fiber of being to help, right? Try to make humanity as better at helping one person. And you see a lot of stuff going on in the world today. I'm always just like, man, what if I just jumped on a plane and started volunteering, like if for hunger, like all the stuff that's going on right now, and or some sort of stuff to really make an impact, right? That's
Sure.
always in the back of my mind, just because I those are that's the kind of ethos that I think punk and hardcore has given me, not just being a musician and being able to express myself in an artistic way, but also the way you kind of look at the world.
Yeah. And that seems to be a common career path for a lot of people in hardcore because it is, like you said, you're trying to make a difference. Like Stretch Armstrong were huge for me when I was growing up, and Chris and David were both educators. And
Mhm.
I know Jay from With Honor was a teacher. And
Mhm.
I'm sorry, not Jay, the singer. I can't think of his name right now, but like you said, you're trying to make a difference. And I think that it takes somebody that has a certain degree of empathy to be able to fill that role.
Yeah. And uh, yeah, there's a lot of I knew a lot of people that went into teaching from the punk and hardcore scene. I think it was uh I think early on, or like people who are more in the like from the 90s, like hardcore kind of community had gone into that. I don't know about
You also
now,
get
but
summers off too to go tour.
yeah, we get summers off and tour and stuff like that. And at that when I first started going into, because I didn't know if I wanted to be a teacher or not. I had no idea. I went to college, and then the poli sci degree, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I just wanted to play in bands, right? Um, and then I was like, oh shit, I should kind of do something good, because touring isn't going to make me money. But then I didn't start teaching till quite later, actually, because I was just on the road a lot, like still playing with the bands I was playing in Boston and stuff. So I didn't start teaching till kind of later. And then you do it, and then you realize, hey, I can apply this aesthetic that I've learned and that I do through music to also working with kids.
What kind of keeps you busy at present? Are you still kind of actively doing Hesitation Wounds, and is there any plans for like a new Hope Conspiracy release?
Nothing. Hope Conspiracy's playing a couple shows that we got lined up. Uh, Nothing new as far as like release wise. Hesitation Wounds was a project kind of that was very unique in how it kind of started. Jeremy from Touche was like, he kind of wanted to get four people who had never really played together before in a room and write and record all in like a small amount of time. So the first EP we did in 2 days, wrote the songs, recorded the full length. The first full length we actually recorded that and wrote it in 4 days, recorded it on the fifth day. And then that
That's
was kind of
You're really
that
good
was,
at that.
I mean, for me, taking a lot of time for something has its merits, but I think a lot of spontaneity, you really get this raw, um, off the rails. Like I love records that aren't perfect. Like I love the imperfections of records, because that's where
Yes.
you're like, oh fuck, like, oh, this drummer maybe isn't playing to a click for this song, and he is off the rails just for that one measure, and you're like, ah, yes. Or the guitar has a weird note that could have been played better, but it wasn't, and it kind of adds that nuance, that imperfection. I love that. And
Yes.
when you kind of work, as I've worked on a lot of records, and obviously it's for the whatever context, right? Like if it's, for Hesitation Wounds, it worked because the premise was, we're doing it, all writing it, we're not spending a lot of time overthinking it, we're going to record it as fast as we can and really put out this product, this like piece of art that's going to be really fast and spontaneous, right? But other bands, different depending on the context, yeah, you're going to spend more time. You want it to be perfect, or you want it to be like that, But I like both, and so Hesitation was that where it's like, we were kind of didn't really spend time on the imperfections as much.
Sure.
But that was a project, and we haven't like put a record out in years, and we haven't played shows in years, and I don't know if we will. It's like it wasn't really like a full-time band, or it wasn't.
Sure.
We did it as a project to put out a record, and we had fun. We had a blast when we did play shows, and I hope we do soon. Maybe play some shows soon, but nothing on the books.
Yeah.
But besides that, keep myself busy is like I'm working on some new projects music wise too. So
And I'm a arts and media guy. I love films. You had mentioned that you're not as big into films. What are some maybe books or things that you kind of consumed as a kid, as a youth, that you really kind of feel influenced you? And what are some things that, I mean, do you not watch any TV or watch any
no,
movies or?
I'm really into films. I just don't know like that much of the trivia like around. Like I'm not like
Oh,
a like
gotcha.
yeah. No, I do really like I do like movies a lot, right? And for me, it's like but for me, it's like I'm also kind of again like a child of the '80s, so a lot of that pop that became American pop culture was something for me growing up in a immigrant household was very impactful, right? So Star Wars was the first Star Wars, like those are still some of my favorite movies of all time, right? I can quote every, the trilogy, like by heart because I've watched them so many
Yes.
times and it was such a big impact on me. So it's like anything that's Star Wars related, and even now I'll give it a chance, but I can't. I grew up like with a lot of. I really got into comic books, so like Marvel was like huge. So when the Marvel stuff started happening, I really got. But now, the superhero movies just don't cut it. It's just too sensational.
You haven't
Um,
seen Fantastic Four yet?
I haven't seen Fantastic Four yet. People are saying it's really good.
That's what I hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then like so those are the kind of films that were really like impactful growing up, and like like Spielberg, I mean Indiana Jones, like the classics, like those made such a huge impact on me. Et growing up, those are also memories that I had of going to the theater with my father, because my father's a big film guy and my father isn't cognitively there as much anymore, so
Mm.
um some of the memories that I remember are of those movies. Like when I went to first, like my dad took me to see Empire Strikes Back in the movie theater,
Whoa.
and he's like he never forgot the way that a 6-year-old child like face was like he's like I looked over at your face when the AT-ATs, the snow walkers, were on the screen, and he was just like I'd never seen this astonishment in a child's face.
They're magical
But
movies, you
yeah,
know?
and then in the theater at that time when I was like that young, you're just like, what is happening right now, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that American movies, like in that sense, made such a huge like impact on me, right?
Yeah.
But there was not, I can't say there's one set genre that really like blows me away, because I'm open to like I like watching a lot of different stuff.
With present media, have you seen Andor?
The first Andor season was incredible.
Okay.
Right? The second season, there's like a middle part of it where I was kind of like, what is this, like a rave in Star Wars? I couldn't get into that whole like the wedding thing and all that. But then, I mean, the subversive, like it's not even subversive, but the whole kind of the political nature of what I think the director and the writer, I mean, they're incredible. That whole series, actually, Rogue One is probably my second favorite Star Wars movie after Empire.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
That's not big.
After the three trilogies, Rogue One is my favorite movie.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It is.
I'm gonna be honest with you. Like when I
Mhm,
first saw Rogue One, I wasn't really that into it. I felt like
mhm.
it was almost like Star Wars fan fiction.
Okay,
And
okay.
then
I can see that.
and
Yeah,
then because I love all the shit at the end. I love when they're like, trying to get the Death Star plans and everything, X-wings, TIE fighters, all that shit. I love all
yeah,
that
yeah,
shit. Like that shit
yeah,
is like, I love the Star Wars of Star Wars, but
yeah, yeah.
I felt like character wise, it was very thin. I felt like plot wise, I don't feel like everything was fleshed out as much as it could be. Now, with having seen Andor, I look at it like it is the season finale of Andor. and that makes me appreciate it.
That's what, and I can totally see that because after I watched the second season of Andor, I watched Rogue One, and it's a different, it sits as it kind of sits as a different movie,
Yes,
100%.
100%. Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's even better for me. I mean, I like the first version, but now it's like, oh shit, so it's
yeah.
like, yeah.
Well, you see where it was kind of like leading up to, like the stakes and how important everything that they were doing in the show was, and then it just kind of culminates. And spoiler alert to anybody that hasn't seen Rogue One, they all fucking die.
Yeah,
So like it was a worthy and noble sacrifice for everything that they went through in those two
yeah,
seasons.
yeah. I like a lot of the Star Wars stuff that's come out afterwards. But not everything that Disney has done I kind of lost interest in a lot of the TV shows. Just didn't really hit
Yeah,
as hard for me.
yeah,
I like the last trilogy that they did, the Force Awakens and stuff. It brought back a lot of childhood memories, right? So I
yeah.
love that whole world is kind of like my childhood. So I remember seeing the movie. I actually saw it in Hawaii because my ex-wife was from Hawaii, and we were there for Christmas, and she's like, let's go see Force Awakens. So we're seeing the theater in Honolulu, and I was like, when Ray and what's his Finn get into the Millennium Falcon and that thing takes off, I was like, oh my god.
Oh yeah.
I was like, oh, I feel like a child again, right?
When I went and saw Force Awakens, I went and saw it at the mall, at the AMC theater at the mall, and the parking lot was completely full, almost completely full. And I got there and I'm driving around. I'm like looking for a parking spot. I'm like, I'm gonna be fucking late if I don't find a parking spot, And this is how horrible of a bastard I am. There was a kid that was standing in a parking spot and he was holding it for somebody. And I didn't realize that's what he was doing. I thought he was
Yeah.
just standing there. And I'm like, hey, kid, get the fuck out of the way. And I'm like honking at him and shit. I'm like, hey, I need to park my car, man. And like, he was just like holding it until whoever drove him there was. And I was just like, and finally he moved out of the way. And I was like, thank you, and then I was like,
yeah.
what an asshole.
You
I was
felt like that.
Well, once I figured out that he wasn't just loitering around, that he had a purpose in standing there, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of a dickhead, but I made it on time. So.
That's good. Yeah, no, those shows have been pretty. I mean, those movies have been pretty kind of standard in my my movie kind of viewing. Yeah.
What did you think about Rise of Skywalker, though?
I mean, I didn't think it was great. Like in the sense of like I didn't like the storyline between Rey and what's his name,
Kylo Ren.
Kylo Ren, yeah. I didn't think that they should have been like romantically involved at all.
Oh yeah, that was
like,
so unearned.
Yeah, and I was like, what is happening here?
I
was like, no, I wasn't a fan of that. But and bringing back the Emperor, I mean, I think when you find out that she's his granddaughter, you're like, I can see how they've twisted, turned this into a story, but it wasn't great. Like, I think Force Awakens was just kind of like Star Wars, but
that
different.
Was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a fun movie, and I actually thought the one that was it Ryan Johnson did the second one.
The Last Jedi.
That one was pretty good. I just didn't the attempt at humor in all of them. I think they made it a little bit more kid friendly than the originals, which kind of was like a bum out. Yeah. I mean, I think they were going that route in Return of the Jedi. Even when I was a kid, I thought the Ewoks were kind of lame.
Oh man, this is like, I swear this is revisionist history, because everybody I knew when I was a kid loved the Ewoks. Like me and my sister loved the Ewoks. We thought they were fun, and like, everybody's like, I hated the Ewoks, and I'm like,
I mean, at the time when I was a kid, I thought the story was I thought it was important for the story, but I was like, couldn't you have gotten someone else? Like, or at that time, but you're
they wanted the Wookiees.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought that, I mean, from a storyline standpoint, those three movies are I think perfect in what they're doing, right? And how they did it, the effects and all that stuff is great. I love like watching documentaries on those people from that era who are responsible for a lot of that technology that they're developing as they're building the movies, right? A lot of these like effects guys, all these makeup guys like Rick Baker and stuff like that. I had the privilege of meeting him. when
Oh
I was in
wow.
LA. Yeah, actually going to his house.
Whoa.
Yeah, and seeing like I saw the original like mask from Thriller. He showed me the like. So I had a student who was really into like effects makeup and stuff, and we had someone who was on the board of our school who was she was the daughter of somehow related to the Goldwyn Empire,
Oh
right?
wow. I
Samuel.
met one of the gold ones. Yeah, Samuel.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I met his Samuel Goldwyn the third or the fourth because I was working at a club and he came in and he showed me his ID and I looked at it. It's Samuel the Goldwyn third or the fourth, and I was like, "Oh wow!" And he's like, "Yep." Before I even said anything, just cut me right off, and I was like,
Yeah,
"All right,"
we had.
you
Yeah,
know.
I think it was his granddaughter or something. She was one of the board members of our school. Really believed in it, and she's like, "Hey, if you have any students that are interested in entertainment, I'll make some calls. We'll make it work." And I was like, "Hey, I have a student who's into special effects." She's like, "Cool, I'll make a call." All of a sudden, she's like, "Yeah, you have an appointment with Rick Baker at his house at 3 p.m. or 2 p.m.
Whoa.
with this student." I'm like, "Okay." So we go. We're waiting outside the gates. He opens the door and his wife is there. They offer us like lemonade and cookies, right? And he takes us in and he's like, "Hey, it was only supposed to be like a 45 minutes and it turned to be like 3 hours."
Whoa.
So he just like talked to us, talked to her, my student, about like effects and how he got into it and things that she could do, gave her some like sample like products and stuff. But then he's like, "Hey, can you guys not take any pictures? I'm gonna take you down to like my museum or where I'm have some of the older stuff." And I got to see the original Thriller makeup for the when Michael Jackson turns into the werewolf, right?
Yeah.
We saw the American Werewolf in London makeup or the actual like figure, not the figurine, but the actual mask, you know.
Whoa.
Yeah, all the stuff he did for all the Eddie Murphy movies where he's like the what is it, the flubber and not flubber, but the professor or
Nutty
whatever.
Professor.
Nutty
Yeah.
Professor stuff, a lot of the Men in Black stuff. I saw all of that, and yeah, it was crazy. I was like, this is insane.
Any Star Wars stuff?
We saw some Yoda stuff that he had. He
Oh
had some of the
wow.
Wookiee. Yeah, he had some of the prosthetics for that. Um, God, he had some of the stuff from the cantina scene, I think.
Oh
Like,
wow.
yeah, I was just like that stuff. I was just like, and I'm trying to keep my cool the whole time,
I was
right?
gonna say you had to be geeking out.
And I'm like, just keep my cool. And I was like, "Thank you, Mr. Baker. This is really." And he's like, "No, call me Rick." I'm like, "Thanks, Rick. I really appreciate this. It's really means a lot to my
Wow.
students." Yeah. So we
That's so
got to.
cool.
Mhm.
That's such a cool story. That's awesome. That's really wild. Yeah, they did have so many like talented minds behind those films. And one that we were talking about the other day, because you mentioned, Spielberg and Indiana Jones, was Ben Burt, who did the sound on Star Wars and on the Indiana Jones movies.
Mhm.
Those gunshots, those pistol gunshots in like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and Last Crusade, they just sound so like meaty and just so like mean and punchy and stuff. I'm like, oh man, this is awesome.
I mean, I don't know how they did all that, but the sound design in all those movies, it's just like, when you watch this in the theaters, or even when you watch it on like any sort of streaming service, and you're like a good, system, it just like transports you. And I think this is the magic to those movies. And I don't want to sound like, oh, back in the day, the movies were like this. No, I mean, I'm sure like, I think a recent series that really captured that for me, and I don't think they did it in subsequent seasons, but the first two seasons was a Stranger Things. I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
you guys really captured that kind of Goonies era 80s movie nostalgia that people my Gen Xers would be like, yes, or even like
Right.
late, Gen millennials, like early millennials are just like,
Have you seen any of the pictures of them now, though? They're like 25 years old and still dressing like they're in elementary school.
I don't know how they're gonna do this last season, but
Uh,
I think the last season they did I thought was okay. Um, But I don't know. I think there's still, and I'm really a big fan of. If we're still talking movies. I love the Ari Aster movies, like
yeah.
Hereditary, and those movies are. What was that? Midsummer. I thought was really good.
Yeah.
Um, Although it wasn't as like creepy as Hereditary was.
No.
Um, but then the new one, what is it, Eddington? I'm looking forward to
Eddington.
seeing it. Yeah,
Yeah. I
I
haven't
look
even
forward.
watched any trailers on that. Is that a horror movie or?
No, I think because I think Midsummer was kind of not really a horror movie, but it was like I don't know what it was, but it was very interesting.
Like a
So I don't.
cult movie, almost like The Wicker
Yeah,
Man.
yeah, exactly. Very much so, like Worker Man. Yeah, that's a really good comparison. But Eddington, I don't know. I was listening to a podcast with Joaquin Phoenix on it, and he didn't really divulge that much information, or divulge that much information about like the plot of the movie, except for kind of conservative sheriff kind of thing. But yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to like seeing that. Trying to think of other movies. Who's the other director that did Nosferatu? I really love his style.
Oh, Robert Eggers, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love the Northman. That was
I
such a
have not
kick-ass
seen
movie.
The Northman. I
Oh,
have
dude,
not
it is
seen
awesome.
it. Yeah,
I haven't
yeah.
seen. Was it the Witch or the Witcher? The Witch, I think was that. I haven't seen
Oh,
that.
oh, you have to.
No, yeah, everyone's like, you
You
haven't seen that.
have
You
to.
yeah.
I was telling somebody this. I had the adult star Arabelle Raphael on here, and she's a big fan of that film as well. And I was like explaining that it's like watching a master filmmaker, but it's his first film. It's like watching Kubrick, like when he was like at the height of his, creative output. But then you're just like completely mind blown when you find out this is the first thing that this guy ever did. This
Oh,
is
I didn't know
insane.
that because just the
Oh
imagery
yeah.
that I was seeing around the movie when it first came out, I was like, this looks intense.
Oh
And one of
yeah.
my favorite horror movies of all time is The Exorcist, right? And
Oh
the
yeah.
from the book to the movie, you're just like, this is insane. And I think he really captured that in not Eggers, but Astor really captured that in Hereditary.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I felt like it had a very like Rosemary's Baby vibe to it
Yeah,
as
it's not
well,
like horror in like what you're like thinking horror sense, but it's got that like eeriness to it that's just like, what the fuck? And these
Right.
random scenes that are just like thrown in there really quickly. You're just like, ah, what the fuck
Yeah.
is going on?
Yeah. Yeah. Exorcist 3, are you a fan?
I've saw it many, many years ago, and it was good. And people are like, "That's the one that's actually really good." I have to go back
Yeah.
and watch it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big fan. I always tell
Mhm.
people about that film because it's like you said, it's got that eerie quality and it's not necessarily always scary, but there's just always this sense of impending doom and dread, like that just
Yeah,
it's like a film over the whole movie.
exactly. And I think it's that those are the kind of like scare. And I was never a big scary movie fan when I was growing up. I kind of like the ones that were very just like kind
Ominous.
of yeah ominous in that way.
Yeah.
And they could be seen as a thriller, even maybe. Not necessarily like gory horror kind of thing. Right?
Yeah.
Even though I mean, Exorcist definitely has some disturbing scenes when I was younger.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of people consider, I don't know if you've ever seen Don't Look Now.
No,
Oh, it's
which one's that one?
Donald Sutherland, Julie Christie. It's from the 70s.
Okay.
It's very it's yeah, it's more like a drama slash thriller than it is a horror movie. I don't even know
Okay.
why it gets lumped into horror, but it has like horrific elements to it. But
Got it. Got it.
yeah, I wasn't too into that the first time I saw it. I might need to give it another try because I was expecting a horror movie and instead I got
Mhm.
like this existential family
Drama.
drama that I was just kind of like,
Got it.
whatever. But yeah, I might check it out. But one question I like to ask people is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Ooh. Um, One piece of advice I'd give to my younger self is that uh, one piece of advice that that's a good question. I'd probably say that even when times are going to get tough, there's always people around you that are going to help you out, right? If you've kept the right friends, right? And so um, I know that now, as being older, that those people were very integral in helping me get out of like any sort of like dark points in my life, right? And it was a lot of my band members and the bands that I played in, right? They have been like family to me, and where it's like I'm an only child, I don't have any brothers and sisters, so a lot of times I didn't have anyone to like kind of go to necessarily, right? And it was a lot of just to tell my younger self is, hey, these people that you're creating music with aren't just your band. A lot of times you hear about bands that are like infighting, fractures. I hate that guy. I hate that guy. That's never been the case with any of the bands I've been in because we've been so tight because we've gone on these journeys of expression and like expression of art, but also creating this, what's the best word? Just like kind of tumultuous like art form, right? That can be very cathartic, right? Together, that you really are vulnerable together, and you become and trust in those people, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of like, those, they're gonna be there for you, and they were for me. But when you're younger, you always feel like you're alone, right? And like, who are you gonna turn to? Who are you gonna turn to? And if I was gonna give advice, I was like, hey, trust the people that you're creating with, and be kind to them, because they're going to be the ones who are always going to be there for you. And that's the case, I think, for me now, because all the guys in like Hope Conspiracy is like a family. We're not just like band members. And that is very integral to us writing songs, but also performing live. It's like we're a unit, right? And a lot of times when we play shows or practice, it's for not just for playing shows, but also to spend time together as people who really, kind of care for each
You're,
other.
you're not beating each other up like Liam and Noel.
No. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'd
Man,
be the kind of the advice I'd give is trust in your friends. Right.
that's great. That's wonderful. And that's great that you've been able to have such a relationship with your band members. Like I do with certain ones, but it's, there's certain ones that I'm on the outs with, and that's their decision, not mine.
Yeah,
So,
and it
you know,
happens. I mean, I've had situation where, I have had a falling out I had a falling out with a band member that him and I used to play a lot of music together. And but I don't believe in holding grudges. I don't believe in, when things happen, you can kind of forget. For me, like, forgiveness and gratitude has been really big lately in my life, just to kind of, um, 'cause these people, you've created some special stuff with these people. Yeah, I think it's worthy for you, unless it's something very egregious, obviously, but just if it's like petty, then I would let it go. And so, I've reconnected with people, and it's been very rewarding, for sure.
sure, for sure. Man, that's wonderful. I, really appreciate you so much for sharing your story. And I think you've got such an eclectic and really interesting life. You've gone on so many different journeys. You've had so many different career paths. And I love seeing what you continue to do, man. I hope to see many more albums from you and from, any other projects that you're involved in. I think that, yeah, you got a really unique flair to you, man. Like
Thanks, Jay.
I love your sound. I love like what you're doing. And I want to thank everybody that has come to this stream. I want to thank anybody that has supported this channel, and you can continue to support this channel by subscribing. Click on the subscribe button, like, comment, share this video. And if you're following on Apple or Spotify, give us a rating on there. That really helps exponentially. It helps within the algorithm. It helps people to discover the show, and so that we can hear everyone's amazing stories. And like I had mentioned earlier, I have a merchandising company, Hell's Heart Merch Co. hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. It's called Winning to get 20% off your entire order. Bella Canvas, Tri-Blend, Next Level t-shirts. They feel so soft. I'm wearing one right now, actually. Not my design. It's a Warzone design that somebody sent me a heat transfer for, so I printed it myself. But got a lot of movie designs, got a lot of music designs. Check it out. And continue to support everything that Neeraj does. Where can we find you online? I guess Hope Conspiracy, Instagram, best way.
Yeah, hopes for Instagram, Suicide Files Instagram, and my own personal Instagram, which I'm not on social media as much anymore. Like, I use it for like promotion, like, band stuff, but yeah, I'm on Instagram too. So
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll be sure to post all the links to all of your projects and how to get in touch as well. And everybody, I want to thank you again for coming to the show, and please continue to come and please continue to support. Namaste. God bless. Be good. Thank you so much, Neeraj. I appreciate you.
thanks, Jay. Appreciate it.
Hell's Heart, lights again.